Paul McVeigh. You've written a new book or a book called Psychology of Leadership.
Yeah, it's called It's Not About You, The Psychology of Leadership. I thought that the psychology of leadership was a little bit dry. It was a little bit of a title that might not be very catchy and didn't have a hook. So interestingly, when I was interviewing the 15 expert and world performers for the book, that I continued to find the same theme every time I spoke to them, that every time the conversation was going around, that it wasn't about the leader, it was always about their people. And then I was speaking to a lady in North America called Emily Janssen. She was the first female GM of a Major League Baseball team. And whenever I asked her the opening question, Emily, what do you think about leadership? And her answer was, well, Paul, it's not about you. And as soon as she said that, I thought, well, that's what a great title to sum up all the conversation. She was the 15th conversation. And whenever she said that, I was like, perfect. Do you mind if I steal that and use that as the title of the book? And she says, yeah, go ahead. So it's now called It's Not About You, The Psychology of Leadership. And this is the first in a series of 3, because actually all the keynotes and the subjects that I talk about whenever I'm speaking for companies around the world, it's always on leadership, or it's on performance, or it's on teamwork. And so next year, we've just started writing the next one, which will be released at the end of next year, called It's All About You, The Psychology of Performance. And then in 2027, we will do the third and last in this series, called It's All About Team, The Psychology of Teamwork. So that is the plan, and hopefully they're much more catchier and much more of a hook than it is of just the psychology of leadership, which seems very academic, doesn't it?
It does. It certainly does. But was there anything within football that inspired you to take up psychology? Because I simply can't imagine you've had many conversations surrounding the psychology of leadership inside a dressing room.
Yeah, no, that was the only place that I got the inspiration from, and it was because in the sporting world and in the football world, the leaders in the room were normally the best players, the most senior players, and of course your coaches and managers. And so if I think about my very, very start of my career, whenever I was just 16 years old, and whenever I left Belfast, Ireland, to come across to join Tottenham Hotspur in London. And on my first day, my first training session was with a West German World Cup winner in Jurgen Klinsmann, when Jurgen had signed for Spurs and just after the USA 94 World Cup. And so when I met him and I saw just the incredible performer that he was, and of course turned into be one of the leaders and probably the most senior leader straight away, because he was the only player who'd won the World Cup in the Spurs team at the time. But actually our manager was also an Argentinian World Cup winner in Ozzy Ardiles. So you have these people who've been the best performers who turn into the leaders, and that was my first day on the job. And so 32 years later, when I've written this book, it's always been inspired by the leadership that I saw at first hand for 20 years in professional football. And then, of course, now for the last 15 years, I've been working in the corporate world and speaking to the biggest companies around the world. And then, of course, you see leaders in business. We also interviewed leaders in the military, like US Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6, as well as academics. And the fifth demographic is a group of people who I just have so much admiration from. They're the world explorers. So people who have just pushed their body to do the most amazing things. And I thought I was, pretty good at pushing myself as a professional athlete for 20 years. But, one of the guys in the book we interviewed, his name was Sean Conway. And he completed 105 Ironman competitions in 105 days. And for anyone who doesn't know exactly just how crazy that is, imagine going for a run 105 days in a row and doing a 5K run, which is hard enough. And imagine doing 105 marathons every day. Well, that's not enough. Imagine going for a 100-mile bike ride on top of that marathon every day. And then imagine doing a 2-mile swim, a 100-mile bike ride, and running a marathon every day for 105 days, and that's what Sean Conway did. So learn from someone who's pushed their body to the absolute limits of what's possible, I think is a really good thing.
Have you been able to see parallels in your experience as a footballer and what you do today as a consultant?
Yes, it's the reason, it's the complete, it's the genesis, it's the start of my why. I was surrounded by these amazing performers, and Jacob, to put it into context, when I say this, I don't say it with an arrogance and more of a reality, that to be not just a professional footballer, because like me, I didn't want to be a professional footballer in my country, in Ireland, growing up. I wanted to be a professional footballer in the number one league in the world, in the Premier League, because it's the richest, most prestigious. So to try and play, compete, and sustain that performance for nearly 20 years, I had to be one of the best performers in the world. Because think of the millions, if not billions, of kids who wanted to do it growing up. Like, most people didn't want to grow up and probably be a banker or a HR director. That's not probably the goal as a kid. It was like astronaut, pilot, professional athlete, probably a couple movie actor, musician maybe.
Yeah.
But those are the things that are at the top of the list. So you're competing against pretty much everyone who had that dream as a kid. So to be able to do that was the inspiration to go, okay, well, if I can use what I've learned in my journey of getting to the pinnacle of what I consider probably the most ruthless and competitive industry on the planet. And then also, whenever I stopped playing, I thought, well, it's not just about going and doing something. How do you actually share that knowledge? And it's almost the difference between a great player doesn't make a great coach or manager. So how does a great player learn to be a great coach? Well, they have to go and study, they need to go and learn, they need to be around the best in that new field, because playing is very different from coaching. And so I went off and I started working with these companies around the world, see how they operate. Also then studied my master's in psychology. So again, being the first person that's ever played in the Premier League with a master's in psychology is all of the experience that I needed, as well as then bringing in this wealth of experience from these 15 other world-class performers and leaders that I spoke to from all the different backgrounds. I thought was the best way to bring together a book, be able to share it with people who are really interested in developing themselves and their own leadership skills.
In terms of leadership, are there any on-field moments or performances which were out of the ordinary that you can recall from your career?
What do you mean by that? What do you mean out of the ordinary?
Like, for instance, that's a big example, but I'm from Denmark. Christian Eriksen died on the pitch during the Euros 21, yeah. and the Danish captain Simon Kjær?
Yeah,
he was lauded for the way he brought the whole team together in that moment. Mm-hmm. As I said, that's an extreme example, but has there been examples like that where it's, wow, that's a leader we have there?
Yeah, I suppose you'd have it from the playing example, and you'd also have it from the coaching or managerial side.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll give you almost like the opposite end of the spectrum of not at the highest level in terms of he played at pretty much his entire career at the highest level, but when I met him, his name was Craig Bellamy, and he was one of the best strikers in the Premier League for a long time. And he just such a great player, such a great professional, such a great teammate to have. He gets lots of different accusations and people accuse him of things. But when I met Craig Bellamy, he was a 17-year-old player at Norwich City when I just joined as a 21-year-old on my first day. And this is, for me, the best example of leadership. He was 17, so he really shouldn't have been the senior member of the team, or they shouldn't have been the person in the team that was directing training, that was influencing, that was setting the standards, that was making sure people didn't slip below, almost like your kind of Roy Keanes and Peter Schmeichel and those kind of guys who just, it has to be at this level, and if you don't operate at this level, this is not acceptable. And I went in and I saw Craig Bellamy do that as a 17-year-old kid. And I remember thinking, because we're roughly the same size, kind of 1 meter, 67, 68. And I remember thinking, I would never have that confidence or belief in myself to be able to shout at the younger, same age, older players, senior players who'd played, hundreds of games in the Premier League who were in our squad at the time. I couldn't believe that he was doing this. But the more I saw him, the more I played with him, and it was only within 3 months he then got signed to the Premier League in a £6 million move in year 2000. So it was a lot of money at the time for a 17-year-old kid. And I was just thinking, this is incredible. This young kid from Wales was making sure that everyone had to perform at his standard. And if they didn't, he'd let them know. And whether you think then that's another conversation about leadership, did the leadership qualities that he had, were they helpful? Did they make people want to do more? Or did they actually go, oh, I don't care about you, I'm gonna do whatever I want? But actually, from my perspective, I thought that was amazing, because I thought his ability and confidence to lead and want others to do better for themselves, I thought was incredible. And I'll actually then go to my very last year of my career. So that was my first year at Norwich City in 2000. I managed to have 7 or 8 years in my first spell at Norwich City. Had a couple of years at Luton Town, came back for my last year as a professional. And we were in a team at the start of that year at Norwich City. We'd probably lost 3 out of the first 4 or 4 out of the first 5 games, sitting in the bottom 3 of the league. And we sacked our current manager then, called Brian Gunn, who you might know is a very famous player. And then we brought in our manager for that year, was called Paul Lambert, who again was a very famous footballer who obviously won the Champions League with Borussia Dortmund and Celtic, etc. So Paul Lambert came in, and the best example I've ever seen of leadership as a coach was he walked into the dressing room at the time, and he looked all of us in the eye. So he didn't say anything for about 30, 40 seconds, just looked us all in the eye. And we were in the bottom 3 of the league. And obviously has a really strong Glaswegian accent. You think my accent's strong and you might not be able to understand me. You should try speaking to Paul Lambert. That's a whole other conversation. And he just looked at us all, almost with like contempt, for, just like aggressively looking at us and just going, what are you doing at the bottom of the table with the quality within this room? We're going to win this league. And he walked out. That's it. That was his opening statement. First time he'd ever spoken to any of us in the room. And of course, it was in strong Glaswegian, so we had to get someone to translate it for him. But essentially, what happened was he walked out of the room. We then get into training. I talk about Craig Bellamy, see our standards in training. It was even higher. I've never seen standards of training so high throughout my entire career. He just would not accept 1 degree less than what he wanted every single day. And I'll give you an example before I tell you what happened. I was coming in earlier sometimes, because sometimes I'd be in the team, sometimes I wouldn't, because it was my last year of playing, so I wasn't always a starting member of the squad. And I would go and do like a jog around the training ground, just to keep myself in shape, because I wasn't doing as much running and training, and had my headphones in as I'm jogging around. Anyway, as he saw me, first time he came out of the canteen, kind of clocked me. The second lap I was coming back, he stopped me and he's like, he called me over because I had my headphones in. I took him out. It's like, what's that, boss? And he went, what are you doing with those headphones? I'm like, I'm just doing a run. He goes, what do you think this is? Holiday park? 50 quid on my desk before training. It's the most expensive run I've ever gone on. Anyway, it was that standard of, Heath, you think I'm doing well, I'm doing extra training, I'm running, but actually it was nothing to do with that. It was the fact that if you're going to train, you need to you don't go out onto the pitch on Saturday with your headphones in, so why would you do it at training? So that little tiny thing where he just wouldn't let anything slip, and suddenly that quality and that standard that he set. Anyway, as soon as he came in, we drew our first game. I was in the team for the first 10 games. We won about 6 or 7, drew a couple, and on the 10th game he dropped me out of the team and brought someone else in, and we went on a 30-odd game unbeaten run for the rest of the season, and we won the league. And then he went on a back-to-back promotion into the Premier League, and he effectively took a team that was almost like a third-tier team with the likes of Grant Holt and Russell Martin and Wes Hoolahan and Fraser Forster and all these people, and went on a back-to-back promotion campaign instead in the Premier League for 3 years. And I just think that was just a perfect example of the standards that a leader sets that I saw in football is just so relevant with the work that I do today in the corporate world.
You spoke with Emmanuel Petit and Ben Mee about the leadership qualities, and you explore this yourself in the book. But did you speak to any manager or chairman about why they would select a certain player for the club captaincy?
That's a good question. The answer to your question is no, but I didn't do that. I didn't get the opportunity to speak to a manager or a a chairman. But I think the club captain role is slightly different, I would say. And I would say it's different because the club captain can be different from the captain that's on the pitch, because the club captain may not play every game. Sometimes you have a captain who's the captain on the field, and then outside that's the club captain who will do lots of other things. And what that also shows, it's the start of almost like working as a CEO, or on that level between how do you operate with a team that you need to deliver results, you need to deliver performance, but actually you need to manage upwards. Because if you have investors, you have a board, you have a chairman, those are the people who you need to report into and you're responsible to. So actually the club captain is one of the best examples of that transition out of sport into the corporate world, because that's what the club captain does. Not only is he trying to perform on the pitch, but probably those are a bit later, a bit older in their years. So they're normally coming to the end of their career, and then they're trying to help. Okay, this is the mood of the camp of the players. This is what the players want. This is the problems the players are facing. We're getting asked to do this. We can't do this. And all of this is all the communications up into the senior levels of a club. So club captains are slightly different, but I understand that when you have a captain, in my experience, it's about what example are you trying to set on the field. And again, you can use lots of different ways that you have a captain. You can have someone who, shouts a lot, is the most aggressive player on the pitch, maybe the person who gets stuck into the opposition the best. Or actually, in my experience, some of the captains that I had were actually not the ones who shouted a lot at all, but consistently they were hitting 8 or 9 out of 10 every single week. And that was the captains that I preferred to play with, because you knew no matter what, whether they were having a good time at home, a bad time, whether they were sick, whether they were feeling good, whether they were injured, whether they weren't, they were hitting 8, 9, 10 every single week. And that was that consistency that I definitely preferred from a captain, rather than just someone who was shouting and might not necessarily perform to the best.
No, but did you have a favorite captain? Who was the best captain you played under, and why?
Well, the best captain I ever had was Teddy Sheringham.
Okay.
Because he was the captain at Spurs whenever I first made my debut, and I think it was the quality that he had, because Teddy was very reserved, very calm. He had this ability to, no matter what scenario, he played in the Champions League final whenever Manchester United won the treble against Bayern Munich, 2 years after I'd made my debut with him, and he was just, no matter what he did the year before, he just played in the Euro semi-final, England-Germany, when him and Alan Shearer were playing up front. No matter what he was doing, no matter what scenario he was in, he was just calm. He just took it in the stride. So his personality I loved, because he was so supportive and wanted you to do well, but also his quality of just being one of the best strikers, one of the best finishers, one of the best players that has ever played in the Premier League, I thought was just outstanding. And for me, he was my best captain.
Did you have a teammate who you believe should have been made captain and wasn't?
Good question. Really interesting. I'd had a couple of years at Norwich City at the end of my career, and I'll sort of put this into perspective.
Yeah.
Not that you've asked me this question, but I'm just going to put it into context.
Certainly.
If I'm going to say who are the best players I'd ever played with, it was, a lot of them would have been at the start of my career, because it was obviously at a big club like Spurs. So playing in my Spurs debut team was Teddy Sheringham, who of course had already just won the Golden Boot for Spurs when I joined him in 94, 96, him and Shearer up front. He won the treble with Manchester United. So just an amazing player all around. But we also had Sol Campbell in my debut team as the centre-half, who went to Arsenal, became an invincible, played with Emmanuel Petit, who you mentioned earlier, went on to play the most championships for England out of any player ever. There's just so many amazing players. But I didn't play in the first team with him, but the summer after I made my debut, we signed David Ginola. And David was just poetry in motion, just like the most beautiful person, most beautiful player on the pitch. He would just get the ball and he could do anything with it. You know, the first year he joined Spurs, he won the double Player of the Year award. So all the players in the Premier League voted him Player of the Year. All the journalists in the Premier League voted him Player of the Year. He was just so sublime. And I think what if those players that I play with, like Teddy or like David, but at the end of my career, I played with Wes Hoolahan. And Wes Hoolahan was a young Irish player whenever I first joined, or when I joined Norwich the second time in 2009, 2010. And I saw this kid who had more ability in his little toe than I had in my entire body. And yet he was playing in the third tier of English football. And I was thinking, this is very strange. This kid has he should be playing in the Premier League. You know, he's an Irish player. He should be playing internationally with the Irish team. Wasn't doing anything. And it was only when Paul Lambert came in and must have kind of, because he'd worked with him before in Scotland and then they played again with Norwich together. And Wes just went on this rise of just kind of his career was not really going anywhere until suddenly with Norwich and Lambert, he just went like that and just went back-to-back promotions. Suddenly he was playing every week in the Premier League and just looking like it was easy for him. You know, he was just playing against Man United, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool. And it was just like, it was so easy because he was so good. And it was that time where I'm thinking, he is the best player on the pitch for Norwich City. He was in my year. He was the reason why we won the league whenever I was with him. He was the best player. But because he didn't speak, because he was really quiet, really shy, quite introverted, he would never be captain. But I think he should have been because he was by far the best player, but he didn't speak in a way like a leader should do.
Yeah, Gary Mappett is regarded as one of the nice men in football. What was your experience of him as a young player breaking through at Tottenham?
Yeah, and well, there's a couple of examples of those players that you have over the years. You know, you have your Gary Mappett at Spurs, who was just an exceptional person because he had the ability to behave like he wasn't a footballer. You know, footballers acted and behaved in a certain way, and he definitely carried himself in a much more distinguished way. He always did everything with respect. Didn't matter whether you were a 16-year-old or a 36-year-old, he'd treat you equally as well. So Gary Mappett was our club captain at the time, and even though he was injured whenever I made my debut, he wasn't in the team. But again, said to me before I went out on my home debut, he goes, "Do you know I scored on my home debut over the years? Glenn Hoddle scored on his home debut, Paul Gascoigne scored on his, Gary Lineker scored on his home debut." And he went through all the players and he went, "Paul, I think you're going to score on your home debut." Anyway, and I scored on my home debut. But he was the kind of person where he was just so amazing to everybody. And that nice guy image was great. But let me tell you, see, as soon as he trained, there was no nice guy. It's the exact same as what you might think about Gareth Southgate. Everybody looks at Gareth Southgate, and I do. I'm the same. I look at him and thinking, what an eloquent guy. What a really smart, what a lovely man. What a really nice guy. And yet I made my debut for Spurs away at Aston Villa, and Gareth Southgate was marking me. Teddy and I played up front, and Gareth Southgate and God rest him, Ugo Ekiog, who's passed away now, were playing centre half. And Sir Gareth Southgate kicked the shit out of me that day. So, the first one was a stud in the back, and I was lying on the floor. He's like, "Welcome to the Premier League," because he knew I was making my debut. So this nice guy image is very, very different from what you might see on, 15, 20 years down the line, or what people perceive you to be, until you have to go out and fight for a ball or fight to try and win a game on a pitch. And the other person I'd put into that category, and actually interesting, at the book launch that we had just last week in London for It's Not About You, The Psychology of Leadership, I invited Chris Hughton. So Chris Hughton, who I'm sure you'll know if anyone doesn't know Chris Hughton. Chris Hughton was part of the Tottenham Hotspur team of the 1980s that won, 2 UEFA Cups, won 2 FA Cups, played with Ozzy Ardiles, Glenn Hoddle, all of those amazing people, Chris Waddle, etc. over the years. And after he had his amazing Spurs career, also played for the Republic of Ireland in the World Cup and under Jackie Charlton, you know, and did the amazing thing that they did in 1990, in Italia 90. Then went on, when I arrived at Spurs in 1994, he was the reserve team coach, and I met him and I was just like, oh, what a lovely guy. You know, he was the first person as a coach to take me as a player. No one else had asked, no one else had said it to me, or I didn't suggest it. He said, Paul, come on, let's go and grab a bag of balls and we'll go and do some finishing after training. Just because we probably had that Irish link of I came across in Belfast and he played for the Republic. But he's a Londoner, he's an English guy, he's been brought up in England his entire life. So all of these things of how you perceive Chris Hughton, then of course he left Spurs and went on and managed Brighton and Newcastle and got promoted in the Premier League, one of the first black managers in the Premier League, and then of course managed Norwich City in the Premier League. So just all round amazing guy, and every single person I speak to about him say, oh, isn't Chris a lovely guy? And I'm like, yes he is. And that's my book launch, and he's like a surrogate dad to me 30 years after I met him. He's still has that, you know, I still have that relationship with him. But let me tell you, see, whenever he trained on the pitch with us in that, you know, early days, the 1990s, when his legs were still able to carry him around the pitch, there's no such thing as a nice Chris Hughton. No such thing as a nice Gareth Southgate. There's no such thing as a nice Gary Mabbutt. These nice guys it's impossible to exist in football as a nice guy, because essentially every single one of them would have broken someone's legs if they had to.
How about Nigel Worthington as a manager? How did you find him?
Nigel was, I would say it's interesting now when I look at it with my psychology hat on. Whenever I was a young player at Norwich, the first manager who signed me was a guy called Brian Hamilton, who was actually the Northern Ireland manager previously and then became the Norwich City manager. And so he'd given me an opportunity to come in as a Northern Ireland young player into the squad, and then he got the Norwich City job. So when I first went to Norwich, Brian Hamilton was there, and he brought in Nigel Worthington as his assistant. So I got on so well with Nigel for a long time. And then whenever Nigel became the manager, when Brian got sacked, and Nigel had a really tough start to his managerial career, you know, near the bottom of the league, facing relegation. I wasn't really playing a lot in the team. He didn't really give me an opportunity. And actually, he tried to release me 2 times in the first 12 months of me being at Norwich City. So I don't think he fancied me as a player at all. Just don't think he was really kind of, you know, like my style. Anyway, really interesting because his job was really on the line. And one of the stories I tell is whenever he brought me in on the Monday before the Saturday game was against Watford. And the Monday before, I was, you know, I think I was playing the reserves and wasn't really, you know, doing much. And he pretty much brought me in and said, listen, wee man, we're letting you go. And I'm thinking, you know, didn't see this coming. I'm doing okay. I'm not just not knocking doors down. Anyway, and he said, I just don't think you have what it takes to be a professional footballer. Right? So this is Nigel Worthington, my compatriot from Northern Ireland, telling me he don't think I have what it takes to be a professional footballer. So as a young kid, I'd just been released from Spurs a year before. Suddenly I feel like I'm getting released from Norwich City. Really tough to take. And it was, you know, I'm not going to lie, it's a pretty horrible conversation to have. And so that week of training felt like a bit of a daze. You know, I was kind of, didn't really feel like I was conscious through a lot of the training. But on the Friday, I got a call from Nigel saying, listen, Paul, you need to be sub for the game on Saturday because we've got a few injuries and it's at Carrow Road, but you know, we don't have enough players to make up the numbers on the bench, so you need to be a sub. Now, of course, I was frustrated, but I'm still a professional. They're still paying me, so I thought I still need to go and do my job. So it was about 70 minutes gone. We're 1-0 down in the game. And I'm sitting on the bench, it was quite cold, so I'm wrapped up, you know, got the hat and gloves and everything on. And next thing you know, he's like, right, wee man, come on, you're going on, left wing. And I'm like thinking, what's going on? Like, I'm making up the numbers. Why is he trying to put me onto the... Anyway, I was like, what? And he goes, no, go on, Paul, go on, get ready. Anyway, and it was almost like this kind of moment of truth where I thought, it's my last opportunity to ever play at Carrow Road. Pretty much, you know, if I'm going to go out, I want to go out with a bang. And so I went on with 20 minutes, 1-0 down. And I remember it's just these things, moments happen in life where everything goes according to plan. Everything goes your way. And I remember going onto the pitch, got the ball first couple of times and just kept running at the right back, going past him a couple of times, put in this cross. And actually it was one of our Danish right wingers who came in at the back post, a guy called Steen Nedergaard. You know, have you ever heard of Steen?
Steen Nedergaard?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's Danish.
Yes. So Steen came in, headed at the back post after my left-footed cross into the back post. Steen came in, headed it 1-1, right, with about 2 minutes to go. And then with about 3 minutes of injury time played, same thing, went down the ring, crossed it in, and we had a big striker called Ewan Roberts, who was an amazing big striker, scored over 200 goals in his career, scored in the last minute against his old club, Watford. We won 2-1. Everybody's going crazy, crowd going wild. We're all, final whistle goes, and we had that, feeling of, you've snatched the victory out of the jaws defeat. Amazing feeling. Anyway, so we'll go into the dressing room. Obviously, everyone's celebrating, music on. At that stage, the beers were out because it was 2001. People care about the health and fitness side. Anyway, so we ended up, we had a bit of a party, but obviously, I know I'm being released. I'm actually going on trial to Bury and Oldham the following week. So I was like, well, I'm just going to have to, just go in and get changed. And as I went in showered, as I'm coming out, I remember the manager standing there at the door. So I got my tracksuit on, about to walk out, and he's the last person. He kind of stops me with his hand. And this was the conversation how it went. He looked at me because he was getting changed, and he had on his shirt, and he was just doing his tie before he was going out to do the press. And he was like, and this was the problem. He looked at me in the eyes. And then he looked down at his shoes and shirt and tie, and he was like, you did well out there. Just come in on Monday, get your head down. You never know where this might take you. And I remember at that moment, it was whenever I had lost that respect for him, because A, he could look me in the eye and almost with a smile and tell me that he didn't think I had what it takes. But whenever he had to tell me that actually had done well and actually wants to keep me, he couldn't even look me in the eye. And at that point, I was like, this is where it's about my belief in myself and what I think I'm capable of doing that's going to determine and dictate the level that I play at for the rest of my career. And then, interestingly, he tried to sack me another 3 times over his 7 years at Norwich City until eventually he got the sack before I did, which is just the irony of ironies in football. But it was the start of essentially a kind of love-hate relationship, because I played with him, and the next year I started on the bench, still didn't think he fancied it, but then because we had an injury to one of our strikers, our wingers at the time, I come on after 10 minutes against Kevin Keegan's Man City, scored to make it, we won 2-0, and then I played 45 games that season, scored 10 goals, got to the playoff final. We lost on penalties, but it was my kind of best year. Then the next year, I was top goal scorer at the club. The next year, we won the league, ran away with the league. The next year, I was nearly a second top goal scorer. So it was like that spell of working together became both a kind of love because it was so much success, and also hate because I never felt he actually ever believed or trusted me of what I could do.
No. So there's no surprise there that he isn't working in management today.
Well, he actually went on and he did well, because he went on to become the Northern Ireland manager. I think he'd had another 1 or 2 roles that he maybe go to Blackpool. I don't know who else he went to after Norwich City. But listen, he's in the same position as Chris Hughton. From someone who's been a player and played at the highest level. Nigel played in the World Cup, played in the Premier League, managed for a long time, managed internationally, managed in the Premier. It's like there's so few people that have ever done that ever in their entire career. So if you want to put him into what percentage of how successful he was, unbelievably successful as a player, unbelievably successful as a manager, because when you compare him to the 99.9% of other managers who have never done what Chris Hughton or Nigel Worthington have done, then you have to put him right up there at the top.
Now, you spoke about Paul Lambert before. Are you surprised then, not least how you spoke of him just now, that he hasn't been able to achieve more in his coaching career?
Yes, absolutely. It's a huge surprise. I think he has all of the qualities to be, one of the best coaches around. Because the thing is as well, what you don't have, and the way that sometimes coaches operate, and you put this back to the kind of the lineage of what happened through Paul Lambert's career. Because if you start with Paul Lambert, if you think Paul Lambert as a coach did exactly the same things that he saw Martin O'Neill do when he was the manager of Celtic. So when Martin O'Neill was taking Celtic to, UEFA Cup finals and doing all these amazing things that he did with Celtic and the players that they had with like Henrik Larsson and all those guys over the years, Martin O'Neill operated in a way where he didn't really do coaching. He'd stand there, he wouldn't say a lot. He would make sure that every single player was guessing about what the manager thought of him. And that's exactly how Paul Lambert operated. And by the way, the fact that Paul Lambert saw what Martin O'Neill was doing, who did Martin O'Neill learn this off? Well, Martin O'Neill won 2 European Cups in his time at Nottingham Forest with Brian Clough. And what did Brian Clough do? He'd stand there. He didn't do the coaching. He had another guy come and do the coaching as assistants. He'd have that, constant, what do the players think of me? Are they in my good books or not? So it's this lineage that you can see. Paul Lambert did it because Martin O'Neill did it like that, and Martin O'Neill did it like that because Brian Clough, who's one of the sort of the biggest geniuses of professional football as there's ever been. And so they all operate in the same way because it's been very successful.
Now, speaking of him, you're slightly critical of Brian Clough in your book, but could we say that his approach back then was suited to the times?
Definitely. And there's everything is relative. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, my business now is called the Leadership Club. And the Leadership Club, we have a tagline that says perspective fuels performance. And so the perspective of what Brian Clough was operating in the 70s and 80s, and obviously a little bit of the 90s, was very, very different in terms of how people were spoken to, what you could say and what you couldn't say. Let's say the characteristics or traits that were necessary to win games and be professional footballers and win championships that Brian Clough obviously did, to win trophies at European level. So all of the things that he did, he was successful for his time. Do you think Brian Clough could operate in the same way in 2025? Absolutely not. He'd probably get sacked after a week just because of his language. But that's different because he probably was such a clever guy that he would be able to operate at this level once he knew what the rules were. And that's the same as we're all operating on whatever environment we're in. How I could speak, how I could act, how I behaved in professional football is so vastly different to how I act, how I speak, how I behave in the corporate world, because it has to be relative and appropriate for the environment you're operating in.
Now, you also played for Mick Harford at Luton. How was that experience, particularly giving your great man theory discussed in the book?
Yeah, so for anyone who's not aware of the great man theory, so it's essentially how over the years and pretty much from the beginning of time, that the leadership style was always kind of normally the biggest person or the strongest or the most outspoken or that kind of the biggest and best. And the reason why it's called the great man theory is because essentially there weren't many women involved in it. Yeah. If you think back over the centuries, there's not really a lot of women leaders who you can point to and say, this is the way a great leader is. It was mostly men. And yes, when you then compare that theory with someone like my old manager in Mick Harford, well, Mick, when he was a player, was one of the biggest players and he was one of the strongest, and my goodness, was he one of the hardest players you could ever play against. Ask any defender that ever played against him at Harford whether he was the hardest player that ever played against. So that style was really, really good as a player in the 70s and 80s and 90s when Mick was playing. But interestingly, you don't see many players like that playing today.
No.
You never really see a player who's 6'4", who just wants to go up and head the ball and can just try and have his back to goal and hold it up, and that's it, and wait for crosses to come in. Although, of course, the style of football is changing and it is quite cyclical, so you are starting to see much more crosses, much more of a variation in the game as opposed to kind of Pep Guardiola's, let's just pass the attack kind of football. But it's still the fact that the evolution of a footballer and as a coach. And of course, when I worked with Mick he was my manager at Luton Town, when we had actually a very successful season, as much as we got relegated because of the administration and financial issues of Luton Town at the time. But actually we won a trophy called the JPT Trophy, Johnson Paint Trophy at Wembley. It was out of the bottom two leagues, and we were bottom of the second league. So we were incredibly successful to be able to beat the top team in the league above us. And it was because of Mick's leadership, because he was, again, just so, we're going to do this together. It's all about teamwork. It's all about working hard. It's about running further than those. And it's that kind of great man theory that allowed us to win a trophy. But of course, that only takes you so far, because once I got into the Premier League, especially as a player, and actually the best example is when you go into international football. When, as an international team, Northern Ireland, when we tried to play the style of the English game for Northern Ireland against teams around the world, we just got battered. We just got beaten up, because they were we would try and play a long ball into the corner and get someone to run it. And the defenders were so clever, so astute. They just drop off 10 yards as the ball's about to be played, and they'd pick it up every time. And then we wouldn't see the ball for at least 8 or 9 minutes afterwards. They were keeping the ball so well. And because we weren't in a style of trying to keep possession, we were just trying to hit it hard and try and get in behind and try and get some through-wins, crosses and corners and stuff. It was embarrassing, because we were so far off the level of international football.
Do you have time for a few more?
Yeah. Let's go for it.
Now, give us a few words on Norwich City as a football club. What does it mean to you?
That's a great question, Jack. Yeah, that is a really good question. Not many people ask me that question. In fact, I don't know if anyone's ever asked me that question. I get lots of people who say, how are they doing? How was your time there? What do you think of this person, this player? What does it mean to me? It was such an incredible period of my life, and it was all down to this very, very unique place of Norwich in Norfolk in England, that because it's quite out of the way in terms of, if you think about the way England runs from north to south, and London in the south, and either Birmingham or Manchester or Leeds in the north, and Norwich City's quite remote. It's out on the side, where essentially, unless, you can go through Birmingham to go down to those places, you can go to Manchester to keep going, or Leeds up to anywhere else, or London to go down to you don't go to Norwich unless you're going to Norwich. No one suddenly finds himself in Norwich and thinks, where did I get here? It's like you were going to Norwich, that's why you're there. And because it's quite remote, it also means it's very, very quiet. And I think the combination of, it was a one city county, which I don't think that exists in the rest of the country. Out of all the counties in England, every other county has more than one team, whereas except Norfolk just has Norwich City. So that, plus the fact that it was right at the start of my career, and because I had been in the Premier League, and then I went to Norwich City, and they were kind of struggling at the start of the time I was there in the 2000s, hadn't been in the Premier League for over 10 years. And the fact that we brought them back to the Premier League, and then within another 6 years, they're then kind of in the Premier League every other year. So I feel like I'm so blessed and grateful to being a part of that journey that kind of brought Norwich City back up to that top level, and winning 2 league titles in 2004 and 2010. That, again, I don't know if there is any other Norwich City player. Only myself and Adam Drury, I think, are the only players who have won 2 league titles with Norwich. And so it's just it means so much in terms of, it's an incredible place. It's an incredible club because of the way that, at my time anyway, for the 8-9 years in total that I was there, that Delia Smith and her husband Michael were in charge of it. And because they're such incredible people and so warm and so generous, it's not like, you could look at this Premier League today and you see all of the teams that are owned by American teams, And I don't know if, because obviously I have no experience of what happens in those clubs, but I wonder how many players have met the owners.
Yeah.
You know, that might be quite low, maybe a very small percentage. Like, or let me ask this question. How many Manchester United players do you think have met many Glazers? Probably
few.
not a lot. Probably that's over 10, 12 years now, so probably not. But the point is, Delia was at the training ground every week. She was so accessible. She was so good. She wanted us to be so successful. She would do anything she could within her power to make us successful or help us be successful. And so all of those combinations, as well as the fact that we had quite relative success, you know, winning a couple of league titles, playing in the championship playoff final, which at the time was the richest game in the world, because it was a £30 million one-off game, which now has gone up to £180 million one-off game. So all of these things that happened over that spell, as well as the fact that it's the people around where I was living are just such incredibly warm people as well. So I think it means so much to me. And actually my experience at Spurs was very different, because London is a very big place and you can get lost in London in every way. You know, literally, metaphorically, emotionally, you can get lost in London. And especially because I was a young man, I just left Belfast at 16, left all my family and friends. But once I got to Norwich City, you know, I felt like I was a man, more mature, 21. I was then lived through my entire 20s. I actually lived in Norwich for 20 years, from 2000 all the way to 2019, before I moved back home to Belfast. So that just kind of shows the affection and regard I had for Norwich as a place, because it's still to this day, I think it's an incredible place, so unique, and you won't ever find a place like it in England.
We see the likes of Brentford and Brighton having established themselves in the Premier League. Could Norwich potentially have been an even bigger success with the right management, the right financial backing?
And again, you know, I think that's part of it. I think one of the decisions why Delia and her husband Michael Wynne-Jones sold at the time was probably a bit of, I think they'd taken them as far as they could take them. And I think that's where you see with Brentford and Brighton, it's a different ownership. You know, it's a different demographic of ownership. It's a different style of ownership. Whereas Delia and Michael were like, this is our little club. We want to do well. Although when I first met Delia in 2000, her goal was, and this is word for word, verbatim, she said, we want to be the best football club in the world. Now, as a 21-year-old guy, when I heard Delia say this, I thought, she's a bit crazy. How can Norwich City be the best club in the world? But it's not. And now, of course, as a 48-year-old guy, I'm sitting here thinking, well, she owned a football club. So that's the first thing. She was a woman owning a football club is the second thing. And so her ambition to get to the level that she got to in her career and TV career, and the amount of millions of books she sold as an author and everything else that she was successful with, was because she had the biggest goals. So she had it in every other part of her life. So when it came to her football club, she wanted to be the best in the world. Now, financially, she's not competing with Manchester United and Real Madrid and AC Milan, but the best in the club the best club in the world doesn't necessarily mean financially. It means how they operate, how they do things. And I think now that I've seen what she has done, she bought that club, I think, for £1. I think she bought it for £1 because it was in debt, and she actually lent the club, I think, £7 million whenever she bought the club as part of the deal. And so when she sold the club in the last year or 2 years, I can only imagine she's made a bit of a profit in the region of 100 million, probably, that she made from that, as well as all the enjoyment she got over the years, from 20 odd years of being the owner at Norwich City. But I think
I'd take that profit.
yeah, it's not bad. It's not a bad investment. But the interesting thing is that when Delia bought Norwich City in the late 90s, let's say the level was, if you were a multi-millionaire, you could buy a football club. But now, unfortunately, being a multi-millionaire isn't enough to buy a football club. You need to be a billionaire. Yeah. So billionaires that buy football clubs, not millionaires. And Delia is a multi-millionaire. She's not a billionaire. And I think that's when she knew, I've taken Norwich City as far as I can take it. And I think now with the new ownerships from the Americans, and of course because they've had huge success in the American sports, now, depending on the appetite for the American owners, if they want to invest their money or more of their money, then Norwich City has every chance to do what Brighton and Brentford have done, because essentially they have all of the possibility. They've got the space to build a 100,000 seater stadium if they wanted it. They've got the fans, because you get hundreds of thousands. I don't know how many people there are across Norfolk, but the waiting list to try and get a season ticket is like 4 or 5 years. There's the demand outstrips the supply. They've got the ability that if they have the infrastructure, they've got the training ground. So they've got everything, but what they don't have is the financial backing just yet. So I would say it wouldn't surprise me in 5 years' time if Norwich City aren't doing what the Brightons and Brentfords are doing. Or look at what Tom Brady's doing at Birmingham.
Yeah.
He's just, all they're doing is just taking this incredible amount of resource that they have from their owners and Tom Brady's, obviously his reputation and influence, and they're just going to put it onto a team that in the last 20 years probably hasn't done very well. Ironically, going back to the 2002 playoff final, it was Norwich City against Birmingham City, and I'll show you this, Jacob, up here. I only have one picture in my wall.
Beautiful.
2002, which is Norwich City against Birmingham City. And of course, Birmingham City have had the same ups and downs as Norwich City have had, although Norwich have probably been more successful over the last 20 years. And Birmingham have had this real dip. But of course, with Tom Brady, sees a great opportunity. And he'll probably do what Ryan Reynolds is doing with Wrexham.
What do you think it says about changing culture inside the dressing room and the boardroom, perhaps, that we're seeing more managers now in their early 30s getting a chance to manage teams even in the Premier League? Yeah,
that's really, really exciting, I think. I think one of the problems with football is that it's still, in some ways, not in all ways, but I'll say in some ways, and I'll give you a specific example. It can be very stuck in the past. So I'll give you a quick example of why it's amazing and another example of why it's pretty horrendous. So when I first joined Spurs in 1994, it was right at the very start of data and science coming into professional football. So in 1994, I'll just talk about the youth team and then we'll talk about the first team. But the youth team, we had a coach and a physio, 2 staff members. The first team with Jurgen and Teddy and Sol Campbell and all the rest of the guys had a manager, 2 coaches, a physio, a kit man, and the doctor come in 1 day a week. So about 5 or 6 staff, right? That was in 1994. In 1996, we had our first sports scientist. So the first sports scientist for the entire club of like 60, 70 players was appointed. And that was in 1996. If I fast forward to 2025, last year, I'd had over 15 years. I had 7 years when I stopped playing, working as the sports psychologist with 2 Premier League clubs. And then last year, I was asked to go in and work with a championship team. For the first team last year in the championship, we had the manager, 3 coaches, 2 physios, 2 sports scientists, 2 strength and conditioners, 3 analysts, masseur, full-time doctor, full-time chef, full-time nutrition. You just it's a joke. And that was in the championship. And I know clubs like Liverpool have 4 full-time mathematicians work for the first team. So it shows the scale. So that is where football is so advanced. Data, analysts, sports science, strength, medical, all of that is incredible. The problem they brought me in is because this team had just been relegated from the Premier League and they were struggling. And that meant that the psychology was probably not a priority for them. So I went in to work with them on their psychology, and having had 7 or 8 months with that team, every single time there was any change in the itinerary, the first session to go, psychology. Anytime I was trying to speak to the players, should we do a session on anything around psychology? It's not for me. No thanks. I've got it busy. I've got to cut my hair. And so football as an industry is still in the dark ages when it comes to psychology and mental performance. And when you compare that to tennis, you look at like a Federer or a Djokovic or Andy Murray or golf, Rory McIlroy, all those guys, cricket, NFL, rugby, every other sport in the world, psychology, mental performance is huge. Football, the biggest sport in the world, still, well, at least in my experience, still stuck in the past.
Absolutely. Are you surprised seeing Jamie Cureton still playing at a decent level?
Yes and no. Yes, I had 1 year. It was my second spell back at Norwich, so we won the league together 2009-10. So I think Jamie's maybe 2 years older than me, because I think he just turned 50 and I'm 48 now. So he was already, I was 32 and I retired at the end of that year. He was 34 and still going. So that was 15 years ago. And I thought, if he got another couple, because he was still fit and he was still training well and he still looked after himself. But I was like, if he got a couple of more years out of it, he's doing well. To still play, to still score against, young, fit, strong young guys in their early 20s, to do that at 50, it's kind of amazing. Although I saw him in the last year of my career, and he was unbelievable in terms of professionalism. He was still in the gym every day, weightlifting, strength, fitness, his nutrition, obviously didn't drink, all that stuff. So the answer is yes and no. Incredible. Just I'm so happy for him, because he's such a nice fella. And also he's just one of the best finishers around, because he's just so instinctive that probably if he had been a little bit big, like me, if he had been a little bit bigger, a little bit more athletic, he probably would have spent a lot of time in the Premier League. And unfortunately, for his career, he probably spent it mostly in the lower leagues. But still, in terms of a goal scorer, one of the best I've ever seen.
Final one. In terms of natural talent, just how good was Darren Huckerby? And how does he hold up with some of the players you played with at Tottenham, for instance?
Yeah, listen, it's funny. Yeah, I was actually watching something last night, and can you believe, because you're obviously from Denmark, it was the new Peter Schmeichel documentary.
Yeah.
Even though he says that Schmeichel's not the way you pronounce Schmeichel, and he called it another way. But anyway,
he'll always find a way to correct you.
Yeah, I bet. So anyway, he was basically saying, and he said it on a documentary of his I watched last night, that you can only look at your life going backwards, but you have to live it going forwards. And I think whenever I see someone like Darren Huckerby now, as I think about him in my 30 years of football, in 1997, when I made my home debut, when Gary Mabbutt said, Paul, I think you're going to score on your home debut today, who was in the opposition for Coventry on that day was Dion Dublin, who I went on to play with at Norwich City 10 years later, and Darren Huckerby, who joined us for our title-winning year and playing in the Premier League. Now, Darren was just almost like a freak of nature, because if I put this into context, as a footballer, you were normally in one of two things. You were either normally a really good long distance runner, you had the fitness to up and down but didn't have the speed, or you were like a sprinter, a striker or a wing back, where you could sprint but you weren't great at consistently doing it. Darren Huckerby was like Gareth Bale. He just could run all day long, and he was the fastest player in the team. And it's like, how does that happen? You normally one or the other, and he was the best at both. So when he came into our squad, not only was he the fastest and fittest and the best athlete and the best professional I'd come across, he then would score goals, and he would pick the ball up and just run past 4 or 5 players. So he would just do all of these things that I'd never really seen before. And it's interesting, because he played a lot of games in the Premier League before he joined us. And at Coventry in the 90s, he was outstanding. And then, of course, he went to Leeds, didn't have the best period there, but he just did well playing the Champions League and all the rest of it. Went to Man City, did amazing under Kevin Keegan at Man City, went to Nottingham Forest, and eventually we signed him at Norwich City. He kind of found his home that he wanted to stay at. But he was just so incredible. And because he was playing probably at a standard slightly lower than what he should have been, he should have really been in the Premier League, I think, his entire career. I don't think he ever should have been a championship player. But because I got the possibility to play with him, I saw him and how good he was every single day, and I just thought, this guy is incredible. And one example, he was on his last, because we signed him on loan. Nigel Worthington signed him on loan in that season. We won the league in 2003 and 4, and it was his last game. So we signed Darren Huckerby and Peter Crouch on loan for 3 months, because I played Crouchy at Spurs in my early days, and he was like a lovely guy. And then he came to Norwich and he was brilliant for us. But Crouchy went back to Aston Villa and he ended his loan spirit. And Darren Huckerby, we thought we were going to be able to sign Hucks. And we were playing Cardiff at home, Cardiff City. And he picked the ball up on the halfway line and he had 4 defenders like sitting in front of him. And he just started running it all for him. We were a bit like, where are you going? You got 4 defenders. And he literally just kicked the ball through the middle of 2 defenders, kicked it through, and they all started running. And Darren just went right through the middle and went right to the goalkeeper, put it in. And I remember just running to celebrate with my former Norwich teammate and Northern Ireland mate, Phil Mulrine. And I was just like, because we still didn't know whether we were going to sign him, I was like, please, Delia, please just sign him. And Phil's like, oh no, just sign him. He was just like, he was that good. He made it so easy and he was so good for us. And he was the reason why Norwich City went on to have the success they did over the next number of years.
What, in terms of psychology, what did he lack then to not make it?
I don't think he lacked anything. I think his psychology was incredible. I think, like, put it this way, I went to Vegas with him a number of years in a row, and every single morning after a night out in Vegas, he went training. He didn't lack anything in terms of his determination and his focus of what he needed to do. I think it was just, it's ability, it's a level. I'll go back to, as the CEO of the Leadership Club, our business, when we're speaking to companies, we say perspective fuels performance. He was one of the fittest, one of the fastest, very good goal scorer, but it's all levels. Was he Ryan Giggs? No. Was he Paul Scholes? No. Was he players who had played at that level for 400 or 500 games? No. Even was he Dion Dublin? Dion Dublin played, probably a few hundred more games in the Premier League than what Hucks did. So it's all just levels of, he had all these amazing attributes, but maybe he just didn't have something that a Premier League manager said, you know what, we need to have him in our team. So I don't know exactly what it was. Maybe it was because of his style, maybe because every time he got the ball, he wanted to run with it and try and take players on. And obviously sometimes you take them on, sometimes you lose the ball. And maybe managers were like, no, he's just too inconsistent. But from our perspective, as a player, I'm like, he's so positive, and every time he gets it, we go forward and it helps us to move forward. So no, I don't know if he lacked anything, because I would also say he just had an incredible career. Very, very successful career.
He had, I agree, but a lot of people don't know about him today.
Yes.
Like the true legends of Premier League, you know which names I mean.
Yeah.
And Darren Huckerby isn't mentioned in that, but
no, I know.
As far as talent goes.
And that's why so, and just to sort of set that conversation to the side, that's why whenever I'm doing any of my keynotes, I normally drop in the photograph of playing against Manchester United in the Premier League and playing against Cristiano Ronaldo. And the reason why I share that photograph, lots of reasons why it kind of is a good thing for me. It's credible that you played against Ronaldo. The fact that 20 years later he's still going, he's almost doing what Jamie Curtin's doing, but at the highest level. And if he keeps going, it's like, how long can this guy go? But nothing would surprise me with him because of his mindset and attitude. But the question I ask is, how does a kid, because he was a kid when I played against him his first year at Man United, how does he go from he was a £10 million signing from Sporting Lisbon? How does he go from that, where he wasn't even in the top 10 best players at Man United, probably wasn't even in the top 100 best players in the Premier League at that stage, and he just went bang, bang, 2006, 2008, he was scoring 40 goals in the Premier League. Then he went to Real Madrid, 5 Champions League. Then he goes to Juventus, and he just keeps going up, and you're just going, this guy is just remarkable. How does he, the levels of what he's doing, and of course, whatever he does to go on and do in his career, doesn't really matter. The point is, how does he do it? And most people think it's not his talent, it's not his physical, it's just purely down to his attitude. He just wants to be the best, and nothing's going to stop him from doing it. But it's the fact that the levels of every time he goes up, just think about how high he's got. And when you're comparing him to, who could you compare? Platini. You'd be like, Ronaldo now makes Platini look like a bang average player.
Yeah, that's
You know
true.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Or anyone, you know, or like Pirlo. Ronaldo makes Pirlo look like an average player because they're just not at that level where it's like him and Messi. Even Zlatan has got the most ridiculous records of league title, all the different things he's done. But you can't compare what Zlatan's done, what Ronaldo's done. You know, it's like, this is why I just have so much respect for these guys. And we're talking about Darren Huckerby. So if I'm putting myself here at the very bottom of this food chain, I'm going, I scored 2 goals in the Premier League, Jakob. So I'm here, right? Then you put someone like Darren Huckerby, who's probably scored, I would say, somewhere between 50 to maybe 70 goals in the Premier League, which is pretty good. It's pretty good, right?
It is.
And then you go, what about, like, I don't know, someone like Dwight York? Probably scored 120 goals in the Premier League and won a Champions League. But then Andy Cole was like the second highest goal scorer in the Premier League behind Alan Shearer for a long time. But then Frank Lampard took him over and he got like, he's then then Wayne Rooney, then Harry Kane, then Alan Shearer. Alan Shearer's still the highest ever Premier League goal scorer. So think of all these players. Gareth Bale might be somewhere in there. And then you go, but then what about Ronaldo? Ronaldo is here, and then you go, him and Messi have just been going higher and higher, and it just blows me away, ultimately, is what I'm trying to say, of that these guys are doing things that the best players in the world weren't capable of doing. You know, just like even Ryan Giggs. Ryan Giggs is the most decorated player in Premier League history. I think he's won, I'm going to guess, let's say 12 Premier League titles. Just to throw it out there, somewhere around that. 12 Premier League titles, 2 Champions League, probably 4 FA Cups, other whatever cups. A huge number of games, 600-700 games, whatever. But he's not in the Ronaldo conversation. Ryan Giggs is not even in the Ronaldo, Messi, Maradona, Zidane. Is he in? I don't know. Zidane was the best player I'd ever... Paul Gascoigne was my hero growing up. Can you put him up there? Maybe for a year or 2, and then he had to come back because he couldn't sustain. It just blows my mind of just how amazing these guys are to be able to do what they have done at that level. And of course, we are literally witnessing greatness right now. It's like LeBron in the NBA. You're just witnessing greatness. It's like, I wish I had been able to see more of Jordan whenever he was playing in the NBA. I saw snippets of it, but like, this guy is what he's doing. Whoever you're talking about, Jordan, LeBron, Messi, Ronaldo. It's just a joke. It's like Federer, isn't it? Federer retiring. You're just going, these guys are the best that this world and this planet and this sporting sphere has ever seen.